Welcome to Scary Stories, the channel that tells you scary stories.
What is the Dogman? What is a werewolf? Are they animals? Are they men and women who turn into animals? Are they neither animal nor man? Are they spirits and apparitions? Are they entities walking in from another reality? Today, we have two new stories sent in to us by viewers and adapted by us, in which we ask these questions and follow wherever the answers lead, even if it's someplace crazy. The Mini Movie Theater and the Dogman. As told to Peter Bernard, read by your old pal Bigfoot. When I was a kid, my family lived in the projects. Sometimes one of the parents of one of my friends would get lucky, and the family would move out of our neighborhood and into a nicer one. The kids would always tell me they would keep in touch, but they never did. Until one time, one of my best friends, who I will call Nicodemus, moved out. I was especially sad to see him go because he was my one friend who was into old monster movies as much as I was. When he said he'd keep in touch, I knew he was lying, and it hurt more than if he had just left and not even said goodbye. But the weird thing was, Nicodemus actually did get back in touch with me. It wasn't right away. It must have been 9 months or a year after he had left when I got a call from him inviting me out to his family's house in the country. When I say the country, I guess I probably mean the outskirts of the suburbs. It seemed to be out in the middle of no place to me at the time, but I was used to living in a heavily populated area. This was the late 1970s, and the place is probably a shopping mall or a gated community by now, but back then, houses were just starting to be built here and there, and I'm not sure I would have even called it a neighborhood yet. Some blocks would have 2 or 3 houses on them, but generally each road ended in a driveway. Each street had one house. It was in the Northeast, but it was like the Wild West in terms of people grabbing up land and creating their own little private dominions. My friend's family was one of the few that hadn't built their own home. I was told that the previous owner left because he said the place was haunted. I asked Nicodemus if he had seen any ghosts since he'd moved in. He looked at me like I was crazy, and he told me, ghosts are in the movies, not in real life. Speaking of the movies, Nick and his dad had rebuilt their garage to be a small 16mm motion picture theater, and they had a big locker full of films they had been collecting. They called it the Mini Movie Theater, and they parked their car outside to afford themselves this luxury. So we spent the day I visited watching 16mm prints of various and random old things. An episode from some old science fiction serial, a black and white cartoon about World War II, an episode of some ancient TV show about a guy and his wife. The feature film was some kind of Bela Lugosi comedy, I think. Spooks Run Wild, maybe, or Ghosts on the Loose. It wasn't that great a movie, but it was awesome to be able to project it ourselves and spend the day alone with films. This had kind of always been our dream, and now he was living it. I was grateful that he had shared it with me for one day. He said he had a rare print of an old werewolf movie that we could watch after dinner, and then I could go home. I was kind of bleary-eyed, but this was back in the days before home video, so I wasn't going to miss my chance to see another movie, especially a werewolf picture. I can't remember what the movie was called or what it was about, The Undying Werewolf or The Wolf Man That Lived Forever or something like that. I was getting kinda tired and having a hard time paying attention to what was up on the screen. I decided to wander inside the house and use the restroom to wake myself up a bit. On the way back to the mini theater, I strolled around their backyard, enjoying the sounds of the crickets and the night animals. It was very different from the sound of the nightlife near where I lived, believe me. Then, all at once, I started hearing a very different kind of sound. It sounded as though someone were standing in the bushes, moving around in a crazy manner. This frightened me, and I realized I had no idea if this was a safe neighborhood or not. Just because it's out near the forest doesn't mean the neighbors are going to be nice. And on the other hand, maybe that wasn't a neighbor at all. Maybe it was some kind of man-eating animal. I sidled back over toward the garage entrance, but curiosity got the better of me, so I leaned over and around the garage one last time to try to get a better look at the bushes and see if I could figure out what was there. I could not. But I could tell it was someone or something tall. I went into the garage mini theater and asked Nicodemus if he had a crazy neighbor living behind him or anything like that. He gave me a strange look and made me explain what I meant. I asked him to come out and see for himself. So, we were both standing outside the garage, looking toward the bushes, which of course were now still and quiet. I was about to suggest that maybe whoever it was had moved on, but there came a sudden, much more violent shaking of the trees from that direction. My heart pumped in my chest and I pointed it out to Nick excitedly. I was trying to remain quiet, but I think I was jumping up and down. The bushes and trees were just going crazy over there. Nicodemus looked at me again, now with an even stranger expression on his face than before. There's nothing over there but a bunch of trees, he told me, and he went back into the garage in a huff. I couldn't believe it. Someone was shaking the bushes like a crazy person, but my friend acted like he didn't see anything out of the usual. I felt like the world was spinning around me because I didn't understand what had just happened. I stared toward the commotion which was still coming from the woods behind the garage. It was like someone was angry at those trees and bushes and was shaking them all over the place. How could Nicodemus have thought this was nothing out of the ordinary? I tried to call out to ask who was there, but I found no voice at all would come out of my lungs or mouth. I was too scared to speak, I guess. It didn't matter though, because someone or something heard my question, and they immediately stopped thrashing about and became silent. Now, not even the crickets dared to make sounds. Now, everything was dead silent. And then, inexplicably and literally out of a clear sky, came the loudest and most blinding lightning bolt of my entire life. Not just my life back then, but my life since then as well. I have never seen lightning from so close before or since. It struck the tree I was looking at, which sounded like it was exploding as it burst into flames. The force of the explosion knocked me backward, and I found myself on my back staring up at the tree cover way overhead. By the time I was able to sit up, I saw an impossible thing. I saw a monster emerge from the flames. It was like a dog, but it was tall, like a man, and it stood on its hind legs. It shook itself as though it were shaking water off, but it was shaking fire away. It took another step forward, and I was observing a 6 or 7 foot tall, hairy, dog-headed monster standing proudly in front of flames, reaching up over its head. It was like a demon coming out of hell, or Gene Simmons making a grand entrance. The next thing I knew, Nicodemus was pulling me up off the dirt and making fun of me. I frantically warned him about the burning tree and the monster, but when I looked now, I saw that the animal was gone, and the tree was as it had been before. It wasn't like someone had put out the fire. It was like the fire had never happened. That was when I think I understood why the previous owner had sold the place. It really was haunted. But just not by the normal kind of ghost, that's all. That property was haunted by Dogman. Stay tuned, we got the Dogman of Staten Island coming up next.
Do you have a scary story you want us to read on the show? Just call our voicemail hotline, 804-LIST-SCARY. That's 804-537-2279. And now for something completely scary.
The dog that turned into a dogman, as told to Peter Bernard, read by your old pal Bigfoot. Sometimes, when I take walks through the woods near my home, it can be quite meditative. I find my mind naturally turning off or at least slowing down, and I find language disappearing and being replaced by a more direct connection with the world around me. Then, on the other hand, there are times when I find myself lost in thought and incapable of feeling truly present in the moment. Most often for me personally, it's nostalgia and feelings of regret that take me out of the present and put me into my own personal torment. That and ammonia smells. I can't stand ammonia smells. My eyes burn before I can even smell it. It's like someone is cutting onions near me. But on the day I want to tell you a story about, what brought me out of my reverie wasn't any of those things. On that day, what brought me out of my reverie was a very friendly, reddish-brown dog. It was a warm, late autumn afternoon, and I found myself sitting on the ground just off a path, leaning back against a tree and listening to the unending wailing sirens of ambulances, fire trucks, police, and who knew what else off in the distance. It seems on some days that every vehicle in the city has a blaring siren and flashing light on it, and none of them do any good, wailing deafeningly while sitting in traffic standing perfectly still. This forest is a refuge from civilization, but it's surrounded by Staten Island all around. So maybe it is a little bit of heaven, but it's surrounded by a whole lot of purgatory. I'm talking about La Tourette Park, located near the Lighthouse Hill area I was living in at the time. It's shaped kind of tall and thin if you view it on a map. It's a lot of nature all in one location, but due to its shape, you're never really very far from civilization. It can seem like you're in the deepest of wildernesses when you're in it sometimes, though. So, Like I said, on that day, I was leaning against a tree, sitting on the ground by a path, and daydreaming. Suddenly, Clifford the big red dog was all over me, licking my face and wagging his tail. Or that's what it seemed like. It was a big, reddish-brown, ultra-friendly dog. It was large, but not unnaturally large, and certainly not alarmingly large. Everything about the big dog seemed friendly, and at first I was looking around to see who he belonged to. Nobody was around except for him and for me. I checked him for a collar, but he had none. He was acting so friendly, though. I was certain he was a pet. This creature was not acting like a wild one. This was a creature who seemed used to comfort. He brought me a stick and dropped it at my feet. I took the stick and threw it into the bushes, and that dog raced into the foliage, bringing the stick out so quickly, I thought he must have brought back some other stick. But no, it really was the same stick I had thrown in there. After a couple of throws which brought identical results, I realized this dog was quite an athlete. I had never seen anything move so quickly and effectively. It was almost like he became one with the overgrowth for a split second and was able to navigate it like an Olympic swimmer navigating a pool. We played for a while longer, but I found myself getting winded while the dog only seemed to gain strength. He was growing more affectionate until I found myself with both dog arms wrapped around my shoulders and his giant face slobbering all over me. I hadn't noticed how large he was until he was hugging me that way. Still, he somehow seemed larger than before. Of course, that would be impossible. I told the dog I could throw the stick for him one last time, then I had to be heading home. I was tired, and it was starting to get dark. This time, he literally caught the stick before it could even enter the trees, and I found myself being smothered in his grateful arms once again. This time he grabbed me so hard that we both went tumbling backwards onto the wet grass. I landed on my back with him on top of me, and all the wind got knocked out of me. While I was wheezing and gasping for air, the immense dog stayed on top, standing on my chest and staring at me. I tried to throw it off me, but it made a hostile noise. I hadn't expected that. When I lay there gasping for air, the dog would look at me. When I tried to throw it off me, or tried to get out from under it, the creature would emit a low growl and curl its lip back a little to reveal its teeth. It would look me directly in the eye with a wild expression, and I would stop moving. For a long time. I don't know how long. I know it was starting to get cold. It had gotten dark. I was still laying on my back with this very large dog on top of me. Then it was like the Oz effect that they talk about. It was like I entered Alice's Wonderland. What happened next was the dog reared back on its hind legs and stood there like a man. It looked around. It was as though it had already forgotten I was down there. It looked around and then it walked away casually on its hind legs. It walked like a man, but with both its front paws held together in a kind of praying position. It still looked like the same dog I had been playing with, but somehow it was proportioned more like a human now. Or maybe it was just an illusion caused by seeing a dog walking on its hind legs for the first time in my life. The thing was over 6 feet tall when walking upright. I was laying on the ground, so maybe it looked taller, but it was definitely over 6 feet because that's my height, and I felt small next to that. I waited until it was gone, and then I waited a little longer, and then I got myself back to the Staten Island part of Staten Island. So, do I think there's a breed of dogman loose in Staten Island? No, I really don't think that at all. I think what I saw was in some sense manufactured by my own brain. That's not to say it might not have eaten me for dinner if it got angry. It's just to say that whatever that was appeared as a dog, then appeared as a werewolf. But who knows what it really was all along? It changed while I knew it. The thing grew larger. It morphed from a creature that ran on all fours to one that walked like a human, all in less than 1 hour. Real animals don't do things like that. Spirits, or entities that need our energy and imaginations to manifest, they are said to do things like that all the time. So what did I encounter really? Was it a nature spirit? Was it someone's escaped pet? Was it a shapeshifter? Was it Clifford the big red dog? I honestly don't know. The only thing I can be certain of is that the next time I got licked all over by a giant hairy creature wagging its tail and acting cute, I'm gonna get my butt the heck out of there. And that's the true story of the time I played fetch with the Dogman of Staten Island.
OMG! Join Scary Stories creator Peter Bernard in... Does that say Boxburg? Where is that, yo? Oh wait, down here it says Peter's gonna be at the Northeast Comic Con with Billary West from Futurama and Akira Takarada from Godzilla. Why was it telling me to say he was in Boxburg? Why would someone want to go to Boxburg if they could go to the Northeast Comic Con instead, yo? LOL, whoever wrote this script sure is silly, yo. LOL. That's Thanksgiving weekend after you're done with your tofurkey. Don't miss it.
Come back for more scary stories.